Hello and welcome to Page and Screen with John Paul Sarni. As part of my work at Stampede Ventures, I spend a lot of time in London, and when I was there last April, I stayed in Soho, and I was very thrilled to see that at Hatchards and Foyles and Waterstones, they had wonderful displays of Andrew O'Hagan's newest novel, Caledonian Road, which I promise you is one of the very best books of the year. O'Hagan is the author of 10 books, I believe, now, including Mayflies, which was adapted for the BBC and is in the US, is available on Amazon Prime. He's also the editor at large for the London Review of Books, a three-time Booker Prize nominee. The New Yorker has called him the toast of London society. And in his new book, he's been compared to both Dickens and Tom Wolfe for his sharp social satire. Caledonian Road is about London, it's about England, and it's about how we all present ourselves to the world in these years when social media and global politics have become all-consuming. The television rights were quickly snatched up by Sinestra, and it's now in development as a television series. So, Andrew O'Hagan, welcome to the program.
Great to talk to you, Jean Paul.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you. You and I have been talking for a little while. You've been very busy running about, promoting the book, and deservedly so.
Guilty as charged. My wife tells me that she's beginning not to recognize me. It's been so long since she saw me. I've been touring the world with this book, which of course is not a complaint. It's exactly what you want to happen when a book comes out. And this one I worked on for 10 years, so I'm happy to take it on the road and bring it to readers for the first time.
Amazing, amazing. It is a beautiful book. It is what I call a chunky book, which is my favorite thing. I just love a big heavy tome that you can really sink yourself into. And now the book is really it's about a lot of things. It's about the art world, high society, cryptocurrency, government, but it's all against the backdrop of London during COVID, in the midst of COVID, really. So I wanted to ask you, because you did start working on the book before COVID had even hit us. But I wanted to ask, did you really get the inspiration for this at the National Portrait Gallery, or where did it come to you, the inspiration for Campbell Flynn, our leading man?
Most unusually for a book of 700 pages, it did actually have a spark of inspiration, this book. There was a moment in the National Gallery, as you say, about 12 years ago, when I was there trying to decompress from having spent a year in the company of Julian Assange and his associates at WikiLeaks. Assange had asked me to help him write his memoir, so therein lies a whole other tale, Jean Paul, that we can discuss another time. But I was trying to decompress from that experience, and I was in the National Gallery in London in Trafalgar Square, and up in the room where the Vermeers happened to be. And I was staring at these Vermeers, and I noticed a tall, rather elegant, well-dressed, Scottish-sounding man talking with great authority and self-possession to a young black student. And this black student was coming back with the most incredible, intelligent, undermining, questing responses to everything the Scottish art historian, as I soon discovered he was saying. And that began a moment just looking at these two guys, thinking of the generational gap between them with the Vermeer over their shoulders. I just suddenly thought there was a fight going on in contemporary life over culture, over ownership, over belonging, over fairness and equality. And I suddenly thought, here in this great gallery in the center of one of the world's most iconic cities, I thought, wait a second. This is the beginning of a big novel, a big adventure, a big entertainment, a big moral inquiry about the way we live now with London as its setting. So that set me going. And 10 years later, here's the book.
Did you approach them? Did you speak to them at all, or just listen?
I just watched them with great attentiveness, and I sort of knew that the dynamic between them was very, very fresh, very contemporary. This Scottish man, who, by the way, was so well dressed as to be quite sinister, there was the wonderful, unmistakable smell of a French perfume called Mitsuko, Guerlain's most famous creation, I think. And I could smell it coming from him, and he just seemed so prosperous and so self-possessed. But at the same time, he was obviously presenting a great enemy to this young guy. And I thought, if a novel could animate the real battle between generations that we've witnessed in the last 20, 25 years, it could be extremely entertaining, but also quite profoundly connected to what's going on in our separate societies. Because if you get a story right in a big iconic city, it can become a sort of international story because we all have these big cities. There's always a Chicago, there's always a Los Angeles, there's always a Madrid, a Rome, and Osaka, which have equal forces and inequalities pulsating at the center of their existence. So I wanted the novel really to be this international story of a sort we don't often get nowadays. It's really based on the Victorian idea of a novel that can include people from all walks of society.
Right. Well, I think that you draw them both so very well, and obviously, as you mentioned, London is such a major character. But even more specifically, it's this northern part of London. It's King's Cross, and in my line of work in the television business, every December we find ourselves at this TV conference called Content London, which is between
Indeed.
St Pancras and King's Cross, and we all sit there and drink overpriced coffee and talk about how wonderful we are. But there's very posh shops and restaurants and things, and the Google offices I think are there.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
can you talk a little bit about that neighborhood? Because one of the things you reference in the book is Charles Booth, who did the London poverty maps, which you can actually look at online now. There's like an interactive map, and you can zoom in and look at the current map and the contemporary map, and it's interesting because it's a part of London where so much has changed, but a lot has remained the same.
Well, that was my experience of it that I really wanted to capture for the readers. And I went to King's Cross when I was 22 in 1991 or so, and I arrived off the bus from Scotland, and there was this almost um, Victorian environment. It hadn't changed hardly at all through the 20th century. This place of Victorian railway stations and the Regent's Canal and gas holders, and this sense of sex workers and people coming and going in and out of London. It was a dark place, it was a strange place, but I very quickly grew to be fascinated by it. And of course, as you say, in the intervening years, Google arrived, Facebook arrived, the Guardian's new offices arrived, the Eurostar arrived. Those cobbled streets were swept away, all the old tenements disappeared, and it became this shining Central European hub of communications. But at the same time, there was a road sneaking up the side of one of the stations, Caledonian Road, which always caught my eye. A multifarious, multifaceted, multilingual part of London, where on one side of the street you had £7 or £8 million houses, which had grown in value and grown in sort of unbelievable value since the 1990s. And on the other side of the street, you had migrant housing and social housing, and the street is full of a sense of inequality, heaving through these lives. And I thought, very, very long ago, I thought if you could capture that street between the covers of a book, you would really have something special. And I know you're in the visual world, Jean-Paul, and I must admit to you that from the very beginning, this seemed like an incredibly big filmable narrative. It was a very visual project, a very visual story for me from the very beginning, and I'm obviously delighted that it has been optioned and taken up with such energy by filmmakers and producers. But for me, it's no surprise because I really, really grafted it together that way. It's always been for me a very uh, hyper real, hyper visual place, King's Cross. That part of London really, in a way, encapsulates all the changes that have occurred in the last few decades, even before we get to big seismic changes like austerity and the migrant crisis, or indeed, as you mentioned, COVID-19, the pandemic. I drew all of those energies into the novel in the end. I wanted it to be one of those books that readers couldn't put down because it spoke so much to them about the lives that we've all lived through recently. But for me, uppermost was the characters. And I think when it comes to visual drama, what you really concentrate on, yes, ideas, yes, jokes, yes, life and arguments, but in the main, I think you're thinking about characters.
Yeah, and the characters are amazing, and you have there. The book is so big that you have them all outlined at the front, so we can have easy access. A nice list of all the characters. And one of those things, as you mentioned, is this conversation around immigration and immigration in the UK, and who makes up the population of what is very much now a new kind of England. So you have a great line in there that says England is no place for strangers anymore, which is, I think, very fascinating. And there's a lot of parallels between the U.S. and the U.K. in terms of what's going on in both places. But when you were
Yes.
mapping this out, because you have characters from Russia, from China, from Poland, I mean, how did you begin to get into these individual worlds? Because you write them, especially the dialogue, you write them incredibly well and so different from one another. You really must have found great people to talk to.
Thank you so much for saying that, because it really was the lion's share of the research work, which took, 6 or 7 of the years that I was working on the book, being inside those migrant communities, following court cases at the Old Bailey in London involving the cases of migrants who died on the journey from, in one particular case, all the way from Vietnam. Nearly 40 individuals died in the back of a container truck crossing from France to England, lorries driven by young Irish guys who'd previously been, smuggling in cigarettes and alcohol. And I got to know all the participants in all of those cases as well as I could. And I stayed in with the court cases, but also with the individuals in the communities so closely, because I wanted the reader to have the sense of real authenticity when they were reading this book, that it was as if a newspaper had come fully alive and then somehow lit up as a living novel, full of voices, full of stories, and full of a sense of what happens next. These guys, the migrants particularly, arrived in an England which had a very hostile attitude all of a sudden to people coming in from outside, just as you say, quite rightly, in the United States. In fact, I've just come back from covering the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee for the London Review of Books, and I wrote a 7,000-word report on what was happening in there. And one of the main things that was happening, as you know, was the vocalization of incredible animosity against people from the other side of the border, particularly the Mexican border, but elsewhere, the idea of people coming in on planes from what are thought of as being shithole countries, to quote Donald Trump directly. This is an attitude and an atmosphere now in each of our countries and in many countries besides. It's a strong feeling in France, it's a strong feeling in Germany and Italy. And I wanted to anatomize that in this book, not just to describe it as an editorial thing or mention it in passing, but to bring you the live characters, the migrants who are trying to get in. What happens to them then? How do they survive or not survive this experience of being treated so high-handedly by countries which were built on the notion of welcome, of tolerance, of the idea of the outsider finally having reached a promised land or a place of decency. That's especially true in America, of course. Bring me your huddled masses, indeed, written on the Statue of Liberty. Well, no more huddled masses is what they seem to be saying now. So I believe, Jean-Paul, as I think you must, that novels are places where these things can be really opened up, and that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I think that it's also interesting because, as you said, you spent 10 years working on the book, but now here in the United States, we're very quickly approaching a very big election here. But then also, since you probably have finished the book, the British government has to change a bit too. The Queen has passed. There's been a change in government as well. Do you think that this book would look any different, for the coming 10 years based on what has happened in the British government in the last year or two?
I think there are cycles of human appetites and human behaviors and human tolerance and intolerance. Human relationships, if you look at them in the Victorian period, it's true of all of our countries. There are certain bells being rung back then which are still being rung today. So a novel that might have been published in the 1890s can have incredible relevance in 2024. And I hope that's true of the books that I've tried to write also. Yes, they're stitched into their time and they respond very much to the realities of a moment. But those moments will ring through the decades, I think, because they're such seismic changes, such crucial and essential features of human nature, that I think novels are one of those places in life where we go to find out what we're really like. You mentioned Charles Booth's poverty maps from London. They were in the 1880s and 90s. And here's the news. Those same inequalities that existed in the same streets around Caledonian Road in the Victorian period are exactly the same today. despite the establishment of a welfare state, whole movements to do with equality, to do with healthcare, to do with feminism, to do with a reduction in the gap supposedly between rich and poor. In actual fact, those same streets that were rich in the 1890s are still rich today. And those same streets, only yards away, that were poor then are poor today. And often the differences are emphasised, if anything. So if you really want to find out about poverty in central London today, certainly feel free to read my book, but also feel free to read Bleak House by Charles Dickens, because these same pressures, these same notions in human society, for all the differences in technology and morals and manners, there are close similarities. I've always imagined that a fully lived life, fully imagined life, would be one where we watched old films as well as great new series, where we read old novels as well as contemporary ones. That would seem to me a pretty full deck. You know, we only have so much time, so I know the squeeze is real, but we must, I think, do our best to read as much as we can.
Yeah, exactly. We have to. Well. Speaking of the series and all the things that we do have to take a look at. So a lot of our audience here there are novelists and there are screenwriters and people that are interested in this dialogue that goes from the page to the screen. So as the team at Sinestra develops this as a television series, will you be involved in that process, or do you sort of let them get on with it, or maybe do you come in to consult? And what is your process going to be with them?
I mean, it's already established itself as a very comfortable process between all of us, you know, that I will be present at their request. Uh, the director, Johan Renck, who, you know, people will know from the work he did on many things, but especially most recently on Chernobyl for HBO, has teamed up with a rather wonderful showrunner and screenwriter, Will Smith, most recently responsible, or rather brilliantly, I think, for 3 seasons, now fourth season about to emerge this week, of Slow Horses for Apple, a brilliant series about lackluster spies based in London. That kind of super group, as I would think of it, has come together around Caledonian Road in a way that's very exciting to me. And I've already been working quite closely with Will Smith on ideas of how these characters' lives might be extrapolated, of how the stories might unfold. It's very much in Will's hands. He's not only showrunner but head writer. But I'll be stepping in at his request to write an episode or two, and I'm certainly, what would I say, a mascot around the whole project. And I'm tremendously excited, but also so curious to see how this moves from page to stage, from many, many pages to perhaps many, many stages, if the episodes that seem to be emerging are anything to go by. I love the process. I loved it with my previous book, Mayflies, which became, for me, a really brilliantly different, a brilliantly original BBC drama last Christmas, the Christmas before last, I should say. And it's a process that I've grown up admiring. I'm a great fan of the screen. Obviously, I provide what I can for the page. That's my job. But I mean, all the way through the history of cinema and television, I've been amazed to see how things can come from what are fundamentally printed marks on a page to being live action with scenes and actors and lighting and landscapes. I just find the whole process completely thrilling.
Well, and I wanted to ask you specifically because now that we know that the beginnings of this were inspired by actual living humans. I mean, when you think of Campbell, is there an actor that you imagine? I mean, you must have had him in your mind now for the better part of a decade, so you probably know what he looks like, what he sounds like. Is there an actor that comes to mind for you?
It's a brilliant question, that, Jean Paul, because even as the inventor of characters, you live in a kind of strange, almost ultra personal relationship to what they look like, partly because you don't want to over insist for the reader on what they look like. You really want to provide the arithmetic for the, if you like, for the reader to do the visual math. Let them put a face on the person whose life you're about to see turned inside out. I know some writers endlessly describe sandy-coloured hair and electric blue eyes and strong jawlines and so on. I rather shy away from that because I love the idea that we each cast the book. Yes, I've got a cast of characters at the beginning, but I like to think that the very clever reader, the very lively reader, puts faces and bodies onto those characters themselves. So when it comes to actually seeing the characters be embodied in an adaptation, of course, I have all sorts of notions, half thoughts, ambitions, and as well as very strong ideas about the kind of look I don't want for a character. But I've found in my career so far that I'm always pleasantly and sort of amazed and surprised by some of the people who end up in the parts. So I wouldn't want to sort of queer the pitch by beginning to sort of name names about who should play the big characters in Caledonian Road. I know that some very, very big actors are in the frame and people are already discussing who they might be. But for me, I'm just intrigued now to see if they in any way match the people that were sort of sketched out in my mind. I mean, I see Campbell Flynn so clearly, but I see him, you know, with sometimes with different physical features. And that was the case with Mayflies too. Eventually, the wonderful Tony Curran, um, uh, who people will know from Your Honour, the ginger-haired Scotsman of brilliance, played Tully, the central character in Mayflies. That was not how I envisaged Tully at all. But actually, when I saw what Tony Curran did on screen, he absolutely possessed the part. I mean, if ever I go back to look at the sentences in the book, I will see Tony Curran. He made it his own.
Amazing. Well, I know that it's never a very fast road, the adaptation, but I think that it's an exciting one. I'm very excited to see what comes of this, and so it's really remarkable. Now that it's done, though, now after a decade on, can you tell us, did you take a break? Are you already working on the next thing? Because this you must be relieved to have this out in the world.
Do you know, it's an amazing thing about literary creation, Jean Paul, as far as I can attest. And it is that the more you do of it, the more you want to do of it. You know, it's a sort of contact sport. You know, you want to get back in the ring after you've just won a fight, or, you know, or you might just have been knocked out, but you still want to get back in the ring. It's that kind of activity. You know, this was a big stretch for me. It was I pitched it high. It was incredible research, a long period of writing, but it's been absolutely wonderful to see the way that it's connected with audiences all over the world. You know, in Australia and America and Canada, all through Ireland and Europe. You know, I'm finding that people are really taking to this story. It's a story of today that I think people in many places felt they were looking for. But weirdly, after 10 years of hard graft and pushing the boulder uphill and finally getting over the top, I find myself already deep in the next book, and absolutely sort of fully engaged with more than one future project. So, you know, there will people who say that way madness lies, and I'll take that one on the chin. But I have to say that I'm too far gone on it now. It's become a sort of happy addiction. I just love consorting with imagined characters and bringing them to readers. It's what I do all day now, and I'm very happy with that addiction, I think.
Amazing. Well, I'm very excited for it to continue to be out there in the world, and I think I loved it in part, or I was attracted to it because I'm such an Anglophile. But I think that really it is so global. It does feel very international, as you said. It can be there's stories here that are about all the major cities in the world, and I think the book is just now coming out in Italy, if I recall, as well as some other places.
It is. It's just come out in Italy and Germany, and it'll be coming out in many, many countries, many languages as we go forward. But it's really wonderful to talk about it to you because it'll always be a project that was very close to my heart. It's not many times in a life, I don't think, even in a busy writer's life, that you produce books of this scale. And you know, finally seeing it in the world is just well, I can only say to you, I have a huge sense of relief as well as pleasure about it.
Amazing. Well, before I let you go, the last question that I ask everyone who comes on: is there an independent bookshop in your area in London or elsewhere in Scotland that you want to recommend, that you want to recognize here?
Yes, there is. That's a brilliant question, and I'm really happy to answer it. The London Review Bookshop in Bury Place, that's Bury Place in central London, right next to the British Museum, so you can't miss it. It's like saying there's a bookshop right next to the Met in New York. It's there. It's delightful. The staff know every single book that they sell. If you're looking for recommendations, if you're looking for inside information on authors, they do brilliant author events as well. The London Review Bookshop is one of the best in Europe at the moment, and it's a great independent bookshop too. So any of you guys listening who find yourself turning up in London, go and look for the LRB Bookshop. You won't regret it.
Amazing. Well, Andrew Hagen, thank you so much. Again, the book is Caledonian Road. It's out in the US, the UK, and several other places. Thank you so much for the book and for chatting with me about it. I mean, it was really amazing, and truly it's one of the best books of the year in my opinion. I loved it so much. I can't stop talking about it. So I'm thrilled that you were able to come by. Thank you so much.
What a true pleasure. Thank you so much, Jean Paul.